Welcome back. Alex Wood, Analytical Graphics. Ed Mackey, also Analytical Graphics. And we're continuing on the modeling of the PBR material for the solar cells. Last time we left off, we noticed that we have a little bit of a repeating texture. They're kind of, our solar cells are a little too uniform. And, Ed, if you can pull up the UV map for this, you can kind of see we have all of our geometry stacked on this tiny little island, and the rest of that texture atlas is wasted space. So if we're happy with how the solar cells look, that's great. We can actually reduce our texture maps, just crop out that little area we're using and save a lot of space. So that's one approach. The other thing that we're going to show now is we're going to do some unwrapping.
I'm going to unwrap these UV coordinates, and we're going to try and get these spread out a little bit. So I'm in the UV editor. I'm going to hit the letter U, and we're going to do Smart UV Project. This thing is not always as smart as it claims to be, but there are a few settings that I like to change. One is the island margin, that is the space between the UV islands, and you'll see that a little bit later. And I always use 0.02. It just seems to work for me. And the other is stretch. I don't want it stretching these UV islands, so I'm just going to let it go like that. I'm going to hit OK, and what it's done, it's taken each of these little solar cells and given it its own unique location in the UV map.
Okay. I can see some variation now.
Yes, we can see some variation. We can also see they're not aligned to anything.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us to tell that on this color map. I'm going to switch over to, I think the roughness map might be a good one. Actually, I could also switch to the normal map. Yes. So the normal map sort of shows us the shape of where these things are. And they're all sideways. And if you remember from the color map, the direction does matter because the horizontal lines are very thin and the vertical lines are very pronounced. So I do care about getting them the right way visually. I mean, obviously these are not the same as the actual solar cell from our original reference image. We're taking a bit of artistic license by adding this much detail to them, but we want them to look cool. So I'm going to rotate these around the 2D cursor, which is in the corner of my map here. I'm going to type R90, enter, and then I'm going to hit G for grab, Y1, enter. So I've rotated them all 90 degrees, and that will get them all lined up more or less the right way, except for this one apparently, which is upside down for unknown reasons. So I'm going to hit UV selection mode and pick the offending guy here, and R180 him. Whoops, escape that. That was not right. He should not rotate about the cursor. He just needs to rotate about its own bounding box center. R180. Okay, looks like they're all right side up, if I can see that correctly. So let us go back to the 2D cursor, and I'm going to do a little scaling on the x-axis, and I'm going to do a little scaling on the y-axis, which is really the u and v axes, but x and y are the keys I'm using. And then I'm going to go up to one of these more distant ones, and we'll fine-tune our x scaling, and our y scaling doesn't need much fine-tuning, does it? Sy. So these are looking okay, but you'll notice that we're getting these top corners clipped off a little bit, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to do a different type of scaling on these. I'm going to go to the individual origins scaling. And when I do individual origins, I can actually scale them all individually like this. So what I would like to do is actually scale them all on the y-axis, more or less like that. And then GY to move them on Y. I'm going to try and line them up here at the bottom. Scale Y. Move Y. Yeah, so I wanted to get this bottom edge because I think there's some visual interest there. And each one of these seems to have more or less landed on one. Now, take a look. These ones on the top landed outside my range, but that's okay for an image like this, where we started with a repeating texture that we downloaded. It's okay if things stick off the top, stick off the side. It's going to make use of that repeating portion. We don't need to use it, but it's safe to do it. And that's in contrast to the other workflow, which we'll show in another video, where you create these UV islands first, and then you create the image for the islands. When you're doing it in that order, it's very bad to have stuff stick off the top and stick off the sides and overlap. Because then if you try and bake something, you can't bake outside the image. You don't want multiple things baking over top of itself. So you would avoid that if you were using that workflow. But we're not using that on the solar panels here, so it's okay. The other thing I think I'll show is that earlier Alex mentioned there was some smudging. I think that was you that mentioned the smudging. And I think we want to try and capture some of that, because we have, if you take some artistic license and get a little bit of imperfections here and there, it actually adds quite a bit of visual interest. It draws people in.
Right. So, yes. So the smudges are very common for solar panels that come out of clean rooms, right?
Sure.
Yes.
I'm sure that they're in there eating their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and getting schmutz all over these panels.
Yes. Lots of whoopsies in those.
Yes.
Right. But the point here is, it gives us an opportunity to show how some of these other properties, how when you just tune the metalness just a little bit, you can see those artifacts clearly in the actual rendered model.
Yeah, let's look at the roughness channel. Some of these are actually scratched in addition to the smudges. And I'm actually going to take these top ones and we'll bring them down here just so they're not, oh yeah, definitely that one.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Little pencil eraser mark on that panel.
Sweet. All right. So we placed all these things individually, and now if we go back to our shading, there we go. What we should see now, and maybe I can make this bigger, is that each one of these panels is a little bit different from all of its neighbors. And this is going to add just a little bit more visual interest.
Now, is it possible to select these faces from the UV map and then view them?
Oh, to find like an offending, yes.
Yeah. Like if there's a particular effect we're looking to
it's a little
track down.
Yes. So let me back to object mode and get the stuff reselected into edit mode. To find, like we wanted to find which one had that big scratch on it, right? Or the smudge on it. Oh, that's our smudgy one there. So I'm going to go into face select mode and edit mode. I'm also going to go into the matching face select mode in UV map mode, and then I can hit synchronize. And once they're synchronized, then I can select this one here and then hit auto zoom. It should automatically zoom in on our corresponding panel. And I'm going to turn off that synchronize because I don't like to always use that. But this panel here that we zoomed in on should be the one that has the sort of the extra smudginess to it that the ones around it don't have. I don't know how apparent it is. We could try adding an extra light source. My light is too far away, but you can get the idea that some of these are not the same as the ones around.
Yeah, those smudges actually blend in a little bit with the facets on these panels.
They do. And we don't want the smudges to stand out. We just want to add sort of that subtle hint of things are different. And it's not just a repeating texture map over and over. We're actually seeing different individually made cells here. Mm-hmm. Even though the real cells obviously were done in an actual clean room where people were not eating their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And they probably had a much higher quality result than I did. But there you have adding just a little bit of visual interest.
Making the most out of your texture maps.
Make the most out of your texture maps, and definitely get them into a state where you're trying to make better use of the real estate on the UV map, and not just getting all of your texture from just one spot on the map.
All right.
So
Thanks, Ed.
there you have it.